I'm not sure I have the energy to read this out from this last chapter of mine, which is frankly polemical and honest about my experience living in Belfast with Christine since 1994. Playing tunes with many of my guests tonight in pubs since the 1980s in Belfast. Working in the Arts Council from 1998 until 2004 as the cultural implications of the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement unfolded. I started my speech about Chapter 3 talking about the disconnection between elite discourse and what musicians actually get up to. And it was continually striking to me that whenever music gets dragged into the political situation, or whenever politics, for their own reasons, become musical, we find this disconnection flowering in the present conjuncture. Will I read some stuff here? Yeah, okay. I talk about there's some kind of theoretical exploration in this chapter as well, drawn from a philosopher and critic named Slavoj Žižek, the great Slovenian Lacanian philosopher. The politics of suture, or the logic of suture, and the unsatisfactory trajectory and narrative that comes from the politicization of culture. Let me just start here in the middle. Many of those who are right when they complain about the two traditions model as a straitjacket, but models proposing 3 or even 4 competing traditions are equally confining. Indeed, the only form of sovereignty worth defending is that which is conducive to a deconstruction and multiplication of cultures. Nothing, wrote the anarchist Rudolf Rocker in 1937, nothing is more erroneous than the customary view of the state as the real creator of cultural progress. The opposite is true. The state has, from the very beginning, been the hindering force which opposed the development of higher cultural form with outspoken misgiving. States create no culture. Indeed, they are often destroyed by higher forms of culture. Any consideration of politically motivated culture, from the tired so-called Irish concerts of the Gaelic League era, about which Joyce wrote scathingly in his short story A Mother, by the way, a century ago, or with regard to the flopped Ulster Scots spectacle On Eagle's Wing, would prove Rocker's point. The logic of this situation is unquestionably bad for culture in Northern Ireland, not least because it contributes to the widespread popular and intellectual misunderstanding of the dialectical relationship between the form of state sovereignty and the evolution of culture and identity within civil society. We might follow Rocker and suggest that culture itself, the field which preserves aesthetic orientations to social reality against the homogenizing force of politics, embodies a more progressive logic than that of political culture. Unlike politics, which strives to stabilize the impossible imbalance between the universal and the particular, culture in its destructive creativity actively wills and sustains this gap. Though some of the musicians that I interviewed in 2004 and 2005 have strong opinions about these matters, few have enthusiasm for committing them to print, like I foolishly have. Instrumentalists in their mute sonority have perforce little to say directly about the world, though their worldless language might speak quite powerfully to the times we live in. If the aesthetic sensibilities of traditional musicians have any political tendency at all, I would suggest that they tend towards the type of anarchism I articulated above. Suspicion of bureaucracies and distaste for political uses of culture are widespread among musicians. For example, many of my interviewees, both Protestant and Catholic, both Southerners and Northerners, resent the transformation of cultus culturi Éireann from a grassroots movement into a centralized state-funded bureaucracy under the leadership of Láras Ó Muircheartaigh in the 1960s and 1970s. As much as they are repelled from the Johnny-come-lately and politically motivated efforts to distinguish through ring-fenced funding and propaganda campaigns Ulster Scots music from its imagined cultural rivals. The evolving language and politics of the state arts sector in Northern Ireland from the late 1980s was equally objectionable. If, as the agencies were arguing, the political impasse facing Northern Ireland in the late 20th century was at root a cultural pathology, a problem of two opposing traditions, it followed that traditional musicians were part of the problem. The 1997 conference in Enniskillen entitled Traditional Music, Whose Music? Funded by the Arts Councils in Belfast and Dublin and the Central Community Relations Unit, or CCRU, of the Northern Ireland Office, made this point clear. John Walker of the CCRU told the assembled musicians, broadcasters, and cultural activists, some of you were there, I think, quote, "It is a cop-out to say that it's not for traditional musicians to change politics. They are part of society here. They are part of the problem. They are part of the solution. To a large majority of the Protestant culture in Northern Ireland, traditional music is divisive. Traditional musicians like yourselves have a responsibility to address this point," unquote. Traditional musicians were caught in a confused discourse, to put it mildly. A 1995 strategy statement from the Arts Council claimed that the traditional arts were, quote, "by their nature diverse and multicultural," and, quote, "know no boundaries," unquote. But at the same time, they were also and simultaneously, quote, "expressive of the communities whence they arise," unquote. Even while groups like Allset and the Armagh Rhymers worked in the schools and community settings to try to hold the cultural fabric together according to the wholesome idea of one tradition shared by all, this idea was all but abandoned by the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. Now, improbably for those who were raised to think otherwise, we have two traditions, one for us and one for use, one Irish and one Ulster Scots. Even as it stubbornly remained what it is, traditional music was being repackaged, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes out of political expediency, and sometimes out of the ignorance produced by a thin form of identification with it, as mine, ours, or theirs. In Daithí Sproul's apt characterization, the descriptive was being eclipsed by the normative, just as it had a century early in the Gaelic League era. When forced into these straitjackets, musicians cry foul, often insisting that a variegated culture cannot be made whole or made into two halves, even while sharing a common repertoire and a set of musical forms. So, for example, traditional singer Sean Corcoran, when the bureaucrats at the 1991 conference tried to force a two traditions model on him, he complained, quote, and this is Sean, "If there is more than one tradition, then there are thousands, because just like accents and just like regional dialects, each area has its own distinctive style and flavor." I think I better stop. Because it hasn't all been polemic. And the rich variety of traditional music that's played in this town, which is fed by Protestants and Catholics, is just so transparently obvious to Christine and myself and our experience here for the past 20 years, well, nothing more needs to be said. We have a tune we want to play. I don't know how this fits with the polemics. In fact, the point of the chapter is that it doesn't. So maybe I'll just take a deep breath and play these couple of tunes that Christine and I were invited, one of the nicest gigs we've had since we've come to Ireland. We were invited to play for Mary Eilís in Aras an Uachtaran on July 12th in 2000, and I'm being told to rush. So, and we picked these two tunes, which are the same tune. One's for marching, and the other's for chilling out in the pub or dancing. And they're called The Maid on the Green. We got the first one from the great ambassador of music in County Antrim, John Kennedy, and we got the second one from a session somewhere down in Clare, probably. And here's Davy Maguire, who's going to join us on the stage. conclusion of chapter 5. I think I'm done. Fintan, are you going to finish off for us?
The part of Bloomsday you have to keep honour the cover of this book at all times, so winding up, just a few comments. I mean, I could disagree with lots of things that Martin said in the book, but that's the whole point of it, is that it is provocative and it does make you think, and it's good that we have something like no book should ever be freestanding. It should also be a platform to inspire other people to respond and develop ideas. I might say on the thing about when you're talking about Joyce and the traditional singing, I remember somebody saying this after hearing Nicholas Tobin that fell on the bone in 1977. It's like, inside every traditional singer there's an Irish tenor trying to get out. And I often think that, but the singing, there's very, like, traditional music is very, very tight boundaries, and it's very easy to distinguish the good, the bad and the ugly, but in song the boundary is very, very fluid, and so it's about singing, and of course that gets you back to what popular music is, and all of this music was popular music at its time. It's just that we've come to enshrine it in something. But I always find that there is a kind of a wee whiff of snobbery always, even in that wonderful chapter in Annie Patterson on the Feis Ceol, where she complains that every Tom, Dick and Harry thinks that they can throw together a few notes, that they've got a tune and that they're passing it off as Irish tradition, but she misses the point entirely. And it's taken up again by Richard Hennebury, who states it more positively. He says you get, like, any one tune, just like Martin and Christine did there with the last tune, any tune you have can be made into a different thing, something with a different rhythm. And the example, people, this is kind of an absurd example, but people always ask, well, what's the slip jig, what's the difference? And if you visualise a tune as having bar lines, this is a jig called the Ship in Full Sail. Double jig. But if I just take the bar line and move it one group of 3 notes forward, you get a different tune. So that's the slip jig. Just shift the bar lines around. A wee bit like moving the goalposts in political discussions. You change something slightly, you've got something that appears to be different. And I can even turn that into a reel. So on and so forth. But the example I want to play anyway is one of the tunes. The topic that Martin was talking about there, the politics, Protestant Catholic identities and traditional music. I wrote a book about it a number of years ago, which nobody bought because it was too bloody dear. A bit like Martin's book, actually. Yeah. It's called Tuned Out, but nobody has read it because nobody bought it. I said, I'm not going to pay that for a book, especially one that you wrote. But me. But like, in that I could go through this thing of these tune groups, and one of them is a tune played by the Orange Band. I learned it off a recording that I bought in Smithfield, the Ballyclare Young Defenders Flute Band, and I have a beautiful tune called the Shanghai March. Then years later I heard it being sung, and Ewan McCall said a song called the Sheeran to the same air. Then I realised it's an old Scottish air, it's an old Irish air, it's very like a couple of Irish tunes as well. So I'll play the Shanghai March first, but then of course it's played as a jig, as the Rollickin' Boys around Tandragee, and that which is the tune of a song which was satirising the Orange Order. So he does the same song, tune serving 2 different purposes. And I finally went to something of Marcus Amorco, a flute player from Derry, noted one time. He got the other end of it. He said that the Rollickin' Boys around Tandragee is really the reel of the swallow's tail. So I'll play the 3 together, and if anybody wants to join in, this is the Shanghai March first. Nothing whatsoever to do with China. Before I finish, in conclusion, I'd like to thank Martin and thank you everybody for sticking through this. Your promise was going to last an hour, and here you are. 3 hours later. That was
an hour per chapter.
An hour per. So thank you. And. There's some comments I want to read out later on. To conclude this part of the business, anyway, we're going to have some questions come in on the internet there, or whatever it's called. And